Chapter 4. Flaming Windows. Walking back home, they noticed for the first time that the third-floor windows did have bars on them, as Nana had mentioned. The third-floor windows were extremely old, and most were broken. The renovated floors had modern thermal windows with bug screens. There were no bars on the windows of the other floors. Only the third floor had the rusted iron bars, looking like an abandoned prison block. As they crossed the main road, the sun was already setting behind Nathaniel and Michelle, elongating their shadows before them. The sun slowly sank further and further behind the western hills. A darker shadow moved its way up the old stone walls of their building. 20 yards from the main entrance of the building, the shadow had already reached halfway up the third-story windows. Walking closer and closer to the building, Nathaniel and Michelle both had their eyes affixed to the third-level windows that were darkening as the shadow rose up them. Only 15 yards from the building, Michelle grabbed hold of Nathaniel's right arm with both of her hands for security. She pulled herself closer to him, hoping he could somehow protect her from her fears. Her eyes, though, never left the broken window panes on the third level. She could see clearly the texture of the rusty iron bars that would imprison anyone on that upper level. Suddenly, only 10 yards from the building, she saw something that frightened her so much she buried her face into Nathaniel's shoulder, bringing them to a dead stop. "You okay?" Nathaniel asked, feeling her grip tightening around his arm to the point of her actually inflicting pain on him. Her face pushed deeper and deeper into his shoulder. He could not get her to move any closer to the building. It was almost as if roots shot from the bottoms of her feet, through her shoes, and deep into the ground. Nathaniel tried to use his other hand under her chin to gently raise her eyes to his. She instead buried her face even deeper into his chest and wrapped her squeezing arms even tighter around him. Bearing the pain of her grip on him, he asked her calmly, "Did you see something?" She nodded her head. "Yes," against his chest. Nathaniel, with great courage on his part, looked back up to the third-floor windows that were now completely engulfed in the shadow of the approaching twilight. He could not see anything out of the ordinary. Hearing Michelle's mother calling them, he moved his attention towards the sound of her voice. Michelle's mother was leaning out from one of the second-story windows. "There you two are." Michelle's mom called out, "We are all going out for dinner tonight. Meet us at the cars in the lot. We will be downstairs soon." Nathaniel at that point noticed his dad and stepmom exiting the main entrance of the building. "Michelle, whatever you saw, it is okay. There is nothing there now, and my folks are with us." He tried to reassure her. His dad and stepmom walked up to them, noticing Michelle tightly hugging Nathaniel. "Well, aren't we the two lovebirds?" teased his father. Nathaniel looked at his dad unamused. Something frightened her. "Did you see the girl with the long black hair?" his father joked. Hearing his parents' voices, Michelle loosened her grip around him enough that he could feel the blood rushing back into his arm and hand. His whole right arm was numb from her squeezing it so hard. He stretched and wiggled his fingers to get life back into them. He could only wonder what she saw that frightened her so much. Nathaniel looked down at her and could see she was still scared. "What did you see?" She raised her head and looked at him. She was clearly not ready to talk. It worried him greatly how frightened she looked. Interestingly, as worried he was about what she might have seen, it bothered him more to see her so upset. He did not want her to be scared. He was actually feeling a bit angry that someone or something would scare her so much. His wanting to protect her was overcoming his own personal fears. In the car, their parents took them across the bridge and through the small woods to the town. The town was very much a New England town, and the people of the town wanted to keep it that way. Only small family-owned shops and stores were allowed in the business section. There were no chain restaurants, no large department or discount stores were allowed in the town. It was almost as if they drove into a Norman Rockwell painting. The town had a very homey feeling to it, with brick-paved sidewalks, trees-lined lanes, and a small park with a gazebo in the center. People walked about in the early evening on the sidewalks and in the park, even though most of shops were already closed, being that it was a Sunday. At this time, only the town's 4 restaurants were open: a French restaurant, a Chinese restaurant, an Italian restaurant, and an American-style steakhouse. On the other side of the town, on the main road that cut through the small town, was a roadside diner that was actually very popular with the local police, teenagers of the town, and the few truckers that would pass this way. "Welcome, messieurs, dame feminines." The waiter showed them to a large round table to be seated. A white tablecloth was draped over the table. Vos menus, he handed out menus to everyone except Michelle's little brother. "Comment est-ce que je peux vous servir?" "Mommy, what did he say?" asked Michelle's little brother. "It is French for, 'How may I serve you?'" "Ah, vous parlez français?" "Yes, I speak a little French," Michelle's mother answered. At that moment, a balding Chinese man in a 3-piece suit walked up to their table and started shouting in Chinese at their waiter. "Nidaniyo ziyobing, wamen bo shur efegwaran, wamen shur jongwaran." Everyone at the table turned to Nathaniel's stepmom for translation. He told him he is sick in the head, and that they are not French, they are Chinese. The older Chinese man turned to his guests, speaking in a heavy Chinese accent. "I am very sorry. My son is sick in the head at times. He wants to be French. Please don't think we are not good Chinese restaurant. You will find our Chinese food here very good, #1 in whole state." "Papa, don't be angry with me," his son begged his father. "Papa, wa bo shur any papa, wa shur ne bie. Buya wang lini shur jongwar. Jga shur jongwa fangwan, bo shur efegwa fangwan." The father scolded his son, in Chinese again, waving a finger in his son's face. He said, "I am not your papa, I am your bie." He also told him not to forget that he is Chinese, that this is a Chinese restaurant, not a French restaurant. She translated again for everyone at the table. The waiter's father stormed off, pulling at his hair in frustration. "No wonder he is getting bald," stated Nathaniel. "I am so sorry." The waiter apologized. "I guess I am just a Francophile. I just love everything French. It is such a romantic language and culture. My father is very traditional. He just doesn't understand." "Why not get a job at the French restaurant across the street?" Nathaniel's dad asked. "That would really kill my father. I cannot live with the guilt." The waiter replied, "There is nothing wrong with being interested in different languages and cultures. I think it is admirable." Nathaniel's stepmom replied, "Can you give us a moment to read the menu?" asked Michelle's mom. "Yes, of course." The waiter went to check on his other tables. When they finally decided what they wanted, they called back the owner's son, so Michelle's mother could place their order in French. He was so delighted to converse in French with someone that he promised he was going to bring them something very special from the kitchen. As they waited for their food, the adults talked, and Nathaniel turned to Michelle, who sat between him and her little brother. "Do you feel up to talking now?" "I never saw anything so frightening, Nathan. I really do not want to return to our building," she replied. He was almost too afraid to ask her, but his need to know what she saw in those upper windows was too strong. "You can tell me." "Michelle, what did you see?" "Hands. Hands." She was looking right at him when she told him, but her eyes were not looking at him. He felt as if she was looking through him at something miles away. "Yes. Just for a moment I could see hands, some pressed against the glass of the unbroken windows, some reaching out and wrapped around the old iron bars." "Perhaps we should tell our parents," Nathaniel replied. Her eyes then focused on him and nodded in agreement. "Please don't be afraid. I won't let anything bad happen to you." A small smile emerged on her face. Her eyes softened just a bit as she looked at him. The waiter then returned with their food, As he placed each dish on the Lazy Susie on the center of the round table, he introduced each dish in Chinese, French, and English. The last dish, though, did not have a Chinese name. The final dish is canard à l'orange, duck in orange sauce. It is French style, not Chinese. I cooked it myself especially for your enjoyment. Bon appetit. Near the end of their meal, Nathaniel decided to tell their parents what they had learned from the ice cream man and the Millers. Their parents listened carefully to the stories of her, the girls of the old factory, the fire on third floor of the building, and of old Mr. Cretan, the owner of the factory. You were saying that in 1918 many people in the town died, just because they forgot to put out ice cream out on one of the new moons for the ghost of a teenage girl, who hung herself on the old water wheel. Nathaniel's father repeated, checking to see if he had gotten their story correct. Yes. Michelle finally spoke up in support of the stories Nathaniel told them. Nathaniel's dad calmly and gently replied to the two of them. 1918 was the year of the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu. Nathaniel, Michelle, Nathaniel's stepmom, and Michelle's stepdad questioned. I think I have heard of that before. It was a pandemic. Michelle's mom answered. A pandemic. Michelle and Nathaniel still did not understand. Yes, a pandemic. Nathaniel's father answered. It means a serious sickness that spreads all over the world. The Spanish flu was a pandemic in 1918 right after World War I. There weren't just many people dying in this town that year. Over hundreds of thousands of Americans all across the country died from it in 1918. Over 600,000 in America alone, if I remember correctly. It has been estimated that up to 40 to 50 million people around the world died from the Spanish flu in just 1 year, more than were killed over 4 years of fighting during World War I. So, you were saying that they're forgetting to leave the ice cream for her didn't cause all the deaths in the town that year? Asked Nathaniel. That is what I am saying. Ice cream or not, people were going to die that year. The Spanish flu was extremely deadly. A virus, before modern medicine, killed those people, not the ghost of a love-lost teenage girl. Michelle, how do you feel about that girl killing herself because she was heartbroken? Her mother was concerned how the story might have affected her daughter. Although I never been in love myself, I think she was silly to kill herself over a boy who would marry another so quickly, just because his parents told him to. If he really loved her, he would have refused and waited for her. Michelle answered. She was still young with her whole life ahead of her. She would have found another love, perhaps an even better love. I couldn't have given a better answer. Her mother replied. That is a very wise answer. Nathaniel's stepmom agreed with Michelle. Michelle shyly blushed from their praise. Not interested in the love-broken girl of over 150 years ago, Nathaniel questioned the grown-ups. What about her glowing eyes? We both saw them. A raccoon, his father answered as he took some fried noodles with his chopsticks from his plate. I would guess that before I would think a ghost ate the ice cream. Most likely it was the eyes of a raccoon you both saw last night. They are nocturnal animals, meaning they can see very well at night. They are also very clever. A raccoon would have no problem opening that box you described to us. A raccoon can't live for over 100 years. Nathaniel pointed out. True. His dad first swallowed his fried noodles, but would not be a more reasonable explanation that a raccoon family, generation after generation, has learned to open the box the townspeople leave out there every month? Nathaniel's dad asked. I would think so. Michelle's stepdad said in support. But what of the hands I saw on the third-floor windows? Michelle questioned. Think about it. Broken windows in the twilight, and a young, intelligent girl's imagination, especially after listening to ghost stories? Are you really sure you saw what you think you saw? Michelle's mother suggested to her. Michelle took a moment to think. No, I am not really sure. It was so quick when I saw it. The mind is an amazing machine. Michelle's stepdad stated. The things our minds do that we think are so simple are actually very, very complex. For example, taking in so much visual, audio, and tectonic information, and calculating those electrical signals into sight, hearing, and touch. In robotics, these are the things we find most difficult to teach our robots to do. The things our human biological brains do automatically every day without even a second thought. Nathaniel thought about what their parents were saying. Their explanations did make much more sense than ghosts roaming around. He started to feel a bit silly for taking the stories so seriously. The glowing eyes he did see could have been the reflecting light from that of nocturnal animals' eyes. He had seen that kind of glow many times before from cats he has seen in the night. A raccoon is of course bigger than a house cat. Although he knows Michelle was very frightened by the hands on the windows she says she saw, he did not share her experience. When he had looked up at the windows, he did not see anything strange. Could she have just let her imagination get the better of her? Nathaniel began to consider what his father was saying was true. Could be that simple. Were he and Michelle merely scaring themselves with ghost stories, like he and his stepmom often do with scary movies? Could it be that the ghost of the water wheel is only a raccoon, much like Grandpa Miller's monsters are merely trees? Nathaniel's fears began to melt away, realizing how much he had let his own imagination run wild. His curiosity was again getting the better of him. He wanted to know what they had made in that old factory. The only way he could find out was he would need to enter the south wing and the factory floor. He was sure now that the ghost of Mr. Cretan was also nothing more than old tales made up from people's imaginary fears. Fears enhanced over the generations. As brave as he was now feeling, he still did not want to go to the south wing alone. He was not sure, though, that Michelle was convinced as much as he was by their parents, that all these ghost stories can be rationally explained away. At the end of the dinner, the owner of the restaurant brought the bill and fortune cookies. Nathaniel's day took the bill to pay as the owner handed fortune cookies out to everyone except Nathaniel's stepmom. She protested. "Where's my fortune cookie?" "Nah, sure, Zhongguaran," the owner flatly stated. "I know I am Chinese." She answered, "But I still like fortune cookies." Disgruntled, he got her a fortune cookie, grunting, "Ayu." Nathaniel's father explained, "They don't have fortune cookies in China. It is a Chinese-American invention for American customers." The table replied with an understanding, as they all rose to leave. At school the next day, Nathaniel saw Michelle during their lunch break. One thing he did like about his new home was his school. The school he was in before, when he lived with his mother in New York City, was like a day prison. The teachers spent half their time disciplining the students. They spent very little time actually teaching. Everywhere they went, they had to be supervised by a teacher, lined up and escorted to the lunchroom like prison gangs. The only thing missing, Nathaniel thought, was the leg irons chaining him to his fellow classmates so none of them could escape. The town's school was very different. The kids paid attention in classes and questioned the teachers, whom seemed clearly happy to answer their questions. When lunchtime or recess did come, the students were allowed to leave the classrooms on their own. During lunch, some students even went to the local pizza parlor for slices of pizza or to the corner grocery store to get sandwiches. Nathaniel learned in this town they called them grinders. Back in New York, they would be called heroes or subs. Some of the children that lived closets to the school would even walk home for their lunch break. Nathaniel really appreciated the sense of freedom and respect his new school treated him and his fellow classmates. "How are you today?" Nathaniel sat down at Michelle's table. "Is this your boyfriend?" One of the girls at the table teased Michelle. The other girls giggled. "We are friends." Michelle replied, not showing any sign at all of being bothered by the girls' teasing. "Well, I think he's cute." A girl with thick glasses at the other end of the table replied. Nathaniel noticed that the girl's hair looked unbrushed, as if she had just gotten out of bed. "Thank you for thinking so." Nathaniel politely replied, causing the girl to shyly smile, revealing her braces. The other girls at the table, including Michelle, giggled loudly. Perhaps we can talk later. I think Margaret would like to get to know you better. Michelle looked at him and smiled. We can walk home together after school. We can talk then. Nathaniel got up and to return back to the table of boys he was sitting at. But before leaving, he looked across to the girl with braces. It was nice meeting you, Margaret. She turned even redder as she batted her eyes at Nathaniel. All the girls at the table burst out laughing, except for Michelle. The woods were not that deep between the town and the river. Luckily for them, the school was on the western side of the town, closer for them to walk home. It was a brisk autumn day. The sun was ahead of them and was above the multicolored leaves of fall. Some of the leaves had already started falling. The road back home and surrounding woods had a scattering of dry golden, yellow, and reddish leaves. The leaves under their feet would crackle as they got closer and closer to the small, rushing river. Michelle and Nathaniel both silently thought to themselves how much they were enjoying their walk home together. I am thinking I want to go to the south wing. That is, if you'll go with me. Nathaniel broke the silence as he kicked a pile of leaves before him. You're not scared? She asked him, a bit surprised by his idea. I really want to know what they made in the factory. I do too, but I am not completely convinced that there aren't any ghosts in that building. Michelle was clearly still more afraid than curious. I know. Perhaps it was my imagination that I saw those hands on the window panes and reaching out grabbing those rusting iron bars. Yet the image is still too clear in my head to be completely convinced it was only my imagination. Is there any chance it could have been something else? Asked Nathaniel. To be honest with you, I didn't see anything. If there was something really there, shouldn't I have seen it too? Yes, I guess so. She had to agree. So, what other way can we find out what they made? The only way I can see us finding out is by going onto the actual factory floor. Why not the library? She answered. The town library might have records of what they made. Even though his curiosity was much stronger than his fear of the south wing, he was still relieved that Michelle thought of a way they could avoid entering the old factory wing. That's a great idea. They must have information on the factory and Old Man Cretan. It's an idea my dad would have suggested. I'm surprised I didn't think of it. Michelle smiled, pleased with herself that she had thought of it before he or his dad did. I am known to come up with good ideas from time to time. You are clearly not just a pretty face. You think I'm pretty? She was now blushing, as Margaret did during lunch. Nathaniel looked at her in disbelief, as if you don't know how pretty you are. Feeling a bit awkward with the direction the conversation was heading, she changed the subject. Race you to the bridge. Michelle took off running towards the bridge. Nathaniel took off after her. Both panting heavily, Michelle reached the bridge only a split second behind Nathaniel. You are fast too. He put his hands on his knees as he caught his breath. Having reached the two-lane bridge that crossed the small river, they could clearly see the old factory on the other side of the river. The old water wheel was still held tightly in place by the green vines that climbed and twisted themselves around the wheel's spokes and paddles. Tired from their sprint, they decided to leisurely walk the rest of the way home. As they crossed the small river, Nathaniel looked down at the water below them. There was something very inviting about the river. For such a small river, it actually seemed deep. When suddenly a river trout broke the surface to munch on an insect that had flown too close to the surface. That was awesome. Nathaniel responded. What was awesome? Asked Michelle, stopping to look into the river too. A river trout jumped out of the water and caught a fly. Nathaniel explained. I heard the splash. I thought you threw a pebble into the river. She answered. It seems to be a good river for fishing. Nathaniel looked down, hoping to catch a glimpse of another fish. There, he pointed at another trout just under the shadow of the bridge. Do you like to go fishing? I have never tried. Isn't it boring? Michel looked to see the trout he was pointing out. The fish was swimming just fast enough against the current to keep its position in the shade. No, not all, especially if you catch a fish. Until you do catch a fish, it is very peaceful and relaxing. This river is clearly stocked with fish. Surprised more of the townspeople do not come here to fish. Nathaniel started to walk across the bridge, heading back to their building. On the other side of the river, they made their way alongside the opposite bank of the river near the small parking lot in the back. Getting closer to the factory, Michel stopped and looked at the tall red water wheel just before them. Perhaps they are too afraid to come here to fish. Perhaps. Nathaniel also looked up at the water wheel. For just a moment, he thought he could see the wheel struggle slightly against the vines, as if it were testing the hold nature had placed upon it. They turned away from the factory, heading for the rear entrance of their wing. On the opposite side of the building, the sun was low in the sky. The eastern side of the building was not only in shadows, it cast a long shadow across the small parking lot and walkway all the way to the river. Michel once again glanced up to the third-floor windows and screamed out, "No!" She again buried her face into Nathaniel's chest. "The hands. You saw the hands again?" he asked her. "No. Can't you see the fire? The third floor is on fire," she cried. Nathaniel looked up, and he too saw it, but as he looked more closely, he realized that the third floor was not actually on fire. It was an optical illusion. The sun was just at the right height in the sky that it was shining through the western windows. He realized that the third floor must have been completely gutted out, for the sunlight was striking the broken and cracked old window panes on the eastern side of the building. The rust on the iron bars, the irregular broken glass windows, and the sun were all in just the right positions to create a perfect illusion of fire. "Look again, Michel. It is just the sun on the other side of the building shining through the third floor. It is not really on fire," he explained to her. Michel looked back up to the third-floor windows, taking the time to look more closely. She too could see that it was just the sunshine passing through the building and oddly striking the old broken glass windows and rusty bars. It looked so real at first. She calmed down, realizing that she had clearly let her imagination get the better of her. "Nothing to be ashamed of. When I first looked up, I too thought the floor was aflame. Pretty cool effect." They both laughed a little, knowing that they had clearly scared themselves over nothing. That evening, over dinner with his dad and stepmom, Nathaniel told them about how the sun shining through the western windows of the third floor made the broken windows on the eastern wall look like a fire. "I'm proud of you that you took the time to really examine it and realize it was just an optical illusion." His father was clearly pleased how Nathaniel handled the situation. "Just shows you that things are very often not as we first think they are. I wasn't interested in your father at all when I first met him." His stepmom picked up some sweet and sour pork with her chopsticks. "It was only after looking at him more deeply that I became attracted to him." "Thank you, I think." His father expressed confusion, not sure if he had just been complimented or insulted by his lovely wife. "You're welcome." She looked at her husband and smiled before placing her chopsticks in her mouth. Nathaniel's dad turned his attention back to his son. "I am sure if you want to, we can prove to the town that the ice cream eating ghost and glowing eyes are just a raccoon." "How?" Nathaniel asked, very interested. "We can recreate the experiment under a controlled and monitored situation. It would cost a little to do it, but I think I have most of the materials to make it happen." His father explained further. "We can recreate the box you said the ice cream man used. Place ice cream in it, of course. Place it near the water wheel where they always do. Place a camera on a tripod with a motion detector to the lid of the box. If a raccoon or a ghost comes and opens the lid for the ice cream, we can, in a flash, take their picture in the act." "That sounds like a great idea." Nathaniel replied, "When can we do it?" "Why not tomorrow night?" "I think I can make the box tomorrow. We can set everything up tomorrow night. His father answered, I don't think a raccoon will care if it is the zenith of the new moon or not, as long as he or she is getting their ice cream. This is why I fell in love with your father. His stepmom pointed to Nathaniel with her chopsticks still in hand. I found out that at first glance he wasn't a very handsome man, and was clearly not a wealthy man, but looking at him more closely, I discovered he was at least a very clever man. Thanks again, I think. His father replied to his stepmom, You are also a good man, kind, loving, and helpful. Your ex cared too much about money, never saw your true value like I do. She kissed her husband on one of his cheeks. And you're a great dad. Nathaniel Edge. Well, thank you both. Nice to know I am appreciated. Nathaniel felt great that his father was getting involved with his and Michelle's search for the truth about the old factory. He asked if he could go up to Michelle's apartment to tell her their plan. His father asked him to first finish up his dinner, help him clear the table, and he could go upstairs. It wasn't long before he was on the second floor and knocking on Michelle's apartment door. Her little brother shouted through the door, Who is it? Nathan, may I please see your sister? Nathaniel replied, No one opened the door. He could hear her brother walk away from the door, and a TV was playing in the apartment. After waiting, and still no reply, he knocked again. Who is it? Her brother again asked. Nathan from downstairs. May I please speak to Michelle? He repeated himself. Again, no reply. This time he banged harder on the door to be sure that he would be heard over the sound of the TV. Who is it? Her brother again answered. Frustrated, he yelled, It's Nathan. The door then opened. Michelle stood on the other side laughing. Don't blow a gasket, Nathan. How long were you there? He asked her walking in as she opened the door wider. Since the first time you knocked on the door, I was curious to see how badly you wanted to see me. She gave him a slight smile. I thought you might be too madly in love with Margaret now. Huh. Nathaniel gave a phony laugh. You seem to be in a much better mood. Yes, thanks to you. She replied, walking him to the dining room table to sit down. She went into the kitchen and brought them both back a glass of grape juice with ice. Thanks to me? He questioned her. Yes, thanks to you. She sat across from him at the table. You made me look at the third floor again to see it really was only my imagination. I am not so afraid now. I'm also starting to think that your dad's theory about the eyes we saw that night being most likely a raccoon's and his explanation of the Spanish flu pandemic. All of it has helped me realize that there must be reasonable explanations to these things. I think he is right, too. People often see what they want to see. We need to learn to be more critical in our thinking. Nathaniel took a drink of his grape juice. Michelle began laughing. What's so funny? He was confused by her sudden outbreak. You have a purple mustache. She laughed, handing him a paper napkin. Thank you. He wiped his mouth, seeing the purple stain of grape juice on the napkin. Michelle placed one of the 2 straws she brought from the kitchen into her drink to take a sip of her juice. She handed the other straw to Nathaniel. Nathaniel placed a straw into his drink, this time taking a sip of the ice-cold grape juice better. He looked to her. Michelle smiled. Yes, much better. Although the mustache did make you look more mature and manly. I am sure Margaret would have loved it. Nathaniel then told Michelle about his father's idea to catch the ice cream eater on film. She thought it was a wonderful idea,